Today is day one for the Come Follow Me study for this week, March 9th through the 15th. The Lord was with Joseph. Genesis 37 through 41. Monday, Genesis 37. Use music. Hymns and other sacred songs can help children feel the Spirit and learn gospel truths. The melodies, rhythms, and simple rhymes can help children remember gospel truths for years to come. As you sing with children, help them discover and understand the principles taught in the songs. We know that God blesses people who trust Him and keep His commandments, but sometimes it doesn't seem that way. Sometimes the person who trusts God is abused and abandoned by family members. Sometimes the person who bravely refuses to violate the law of chastity gets falsely accused anyway. When things like that happen to us, we might be tempted to become angry with God. We might wonder, what's the point of trying to do the right thing if it only seems to make life harder? Joseph, the son of Jacob, could have wondered that. At times, this faithful man prospered. At other times, it seemed that the more faithful he was, the more hardship he faced. But Joseph never left the Lord, and the Lord never left Joseph. That doesn't mean the Lord prevented bad things from happening to Joseph, but through it all, the Lord was with him. The story of Joseph, the son of Jacob, who was called Israel, is a vivid representation of the great truth that all things work together for good to those who loved God. Joseph always seemed to do the right thing, but still, more importantly, he did it for the right reason. And how very, very significant that is. Joseph was sold by his own brothers as a slave and was purchased by Potiphar, a captain of the guard of Pharaoh. But even as an indentured servant, Joseph turned every experience in all circumstances, no matter how trying, into something good. This ability to turn everything into something good appears to be a godly characteristic. Our Heavenly Father always seems able to do this. Everything, no matter how dire, becomes a victory to the Lord. Joseph, although a slave and wholly undeserving of this fate, nevertheless remained faithful to the Lord and continued to live the commandments, and made something very good of his degrading circumstances. People like this cannot be defeated because they will not give up. They have the correct positive attitude, and Dale Carnegie's expression seems to apply. If you feel you have a lemon, you can either complain about how sour it is, or you can make a lemonade. It is all up to you. Genesis 37 through 41. Joseph was favored by the Lord and his father Jacob, but he was hated and envied by his brothers. Joseph's brothers sold him to Potiphar in Egypt. The Lord was with Joseph in his afflictions. He prospered in Potiphar's house until he was wrongly accused and sent to prison. Joseph prospered in prison and interpreted the dreams of Pharaoh's chief butler and baker. Joseph then interpreted the dreams of Pharaoh himself, which warned of a coming famine. Pharaoh made Joseph a ruler in Egypt, and Joseph implemented a plan to store food in preparation for the famine. Genesis 37. Jacob loves and favors Joseph, who is hated by his brothers. Genesis 37, 1 through 3. And Jacob dwelt in the land wherein his father was a stranger, in the land of Canaan. And this is the history of the generations of Jacob. Joseph, being 17 years old, was feeding the flock of his brethren, and the lad was with the sons of Bilhah, and with the sons of Zilpah, his father's wives. And Joseph brought unto his father their evil report. Now Israel loved Joseph more than all his children, because he was the son of his old age. Many aspects of Joseph's life can remind us of Jesus Christ. The following are some examples. They were beloved sons. Genesis 37:3 continued, and he made him a coat of many colors. The Hebrew word translated as coat in the King James Version of the Bible can also refer to a garment, robe, or tunic. Scholars have suggested that the phrase coat of many colors might describe a richly embroidered garment that reached to the palms and feet. The Hebrew word denotes a long coat with sleeves, an upper coat reaching to the wrists and ankles, such as noblemen and kings' daughters wore. Note also 2 Samuel 13:18, which says that the daughters of King David wore similar coats. The coat may have been of different colors, but its significance seems to have been far more than its brightness and beauty. One noted scholar suggested that it was a tunic reaching to the palms of the hands and soles of the feet, the long tunic, with sleeves worn by young men and maidens of the better class, in the case of Joseph, supposed by Bush to have been the badge of the birthright, which has been forfeited by Reuben and transferred to Joseph. Genesis 37:4. And when his brethren saw that their father loved him more than all his brethren, they hated him and could not speak peaceably unto him. Similarities between Joseph and Jesus Christ. They were rejected by some of their father's other children. It is possible that Joseph received this coat to represent his role as Jacob's birthright son. If indeed this coat signaled that Joseph held the birthright, which may have been in question among the brothers because there were 4 firstborn sons in Jacob's family, this fact would explain the intense hostility and jealousy the coat provoked among the other sons of Jacob. The following brothers could have easily have thought that they should have had the birthright. Reuben, he was the firstborn of all the sons. Although he had lost the right, he may not have accepted that fact. Simeon, since he was the second son of Leah, and second in line following Reuben, he could have assumed the birthright would come to him after Reuben lost his right to it. Judah, he could have argued that not only Reuben had lost the right, but so had Simeon and Levi through the massacre of the Shechemites. The disqualification of these sons would make him the rightful legal heir. Dan, because his mother Bilhah was considered Rachel's property, he could argue that he was Rachel's firstborn, not Joseph, and therefore should have received the birthright when Reuben lost it. Gad, he was the firstborn son of Zilpah, and therefore could easily have thought he should have taken the birthright after Reuben forfeited it. Joseph's garment, along with his dreams and his father's favor, contributed to his brother's jealousy of him. Joseph dreams that his parents and brothers make obeisance to him. Genesis 37:5. And Joseph dreamed a dream, and he told it to his brethren, and they hated him yet the more. Elder Marion G. Romney said, "Now I know, my brothers and sisters and friends, and bear witness to the fact that revelation from the Lord comes through the spoken word. Through the spoken word, by personal visitation, by messengers from the Lord, through dreams, and by way of visions, and by the voice of the Lord coming into one's mind. Most often, however, revelation comes to us by means of the still small voice." President Harold B. Lee said, "It never ceases to amaze me how gullible some of our church members are in broadcasting sensational stories, or dreams, or visions, or purported patriarchal blessings, or quotations, or supposedly from some person's private diary. Addresses given are spurious, and yet the amazing thing is that we find that these spurious writings and some of these purported revelations, which we found upon investigation are absolutely false, are finding their way into our Relief Society meetings, into priesthood quorums, firesides, institutes, and seminaries. Brethren of the priesthood, you defenders of the faith, we would wish that you would plead with our saints to cease promoting the works of the devil. Spend your time promoting the works of the Lord, and don't allow these things to be found among those under your charge, for they are the works of Satan. And we are playing his game whenever we permit such things to be about and repeated and passed about on every side." Elder Boyd K. Packer said, "The very nature of the priesthood allows for a great variety in the gospel knowledge of members struggling to learn as they serve. A member at any given time may not understand one point of doctrine or another, may have a misconception, or even believe something is true that in fact is false. There is not much danger in that. That is an inevitable part of learning the gospel. No member of the church should be embarrassed at the need to repent of a false notion he might have believed. Such ideas are corrected as one grows in light and knowledge. It is not the belief in a false notion that is the problem. It is the teaching of it to others. In the church, we have the agency to believe whatever we want to believe about whatever we want to believe, but we are not authorized to teach it to others as truth. If someone approaches you individually or invites you to very private meetings, claiming to have some special calling, whatever you do, follow Paul's counsel. From such, turn away. They may claim special revelations and callings. They may claim visions and visitations. But where, pray tell me, can they claim the sustaining vote of the membership. I read this letter from the First Presidency in 1913. It had been entitled A Warning Voice to the officers and members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. From the days of Hiram Page, at different periods, there have been manifestations from delusive spirits to members of the church. Sometimes these have come to men and women who, because of transgression, become easy prey to the arch deceiver. At other times, people who pride themselves on their strict observance of the rules and ordinances and ceremonies of the church are led astray by false spirits, who exercise an influence so imitative of that which proceeds from a divine source, that even these persons who think they are the very elect find it difficult to discern the essential difference. Satan himself has transformed himself to be apparently an angel of light. When visions, dreams, tongues, prophecy, impressions of any extraordinary gift or impression convey something out of harmony with the accepted revelations of the church or contrary to the decisions of its constituted authorities, Latter-day Saints may know that it is not of God, no matter how plausible it may appear. Also, they should understand that directions for the guidance of the church will come by revelation, through the head. All faithful members are entitled to the inspiration of the Holy Ghost for themselves, their families, and for those over whom they are appointed and ordained to preside. But anything at discord with that which comes from God through the head of the church is not to be received as authoritative or reliable. In secular as well as spiritual affairs, saints may receive divine guidance and revelation affecting themselves, but this does not convey authority to direct others, and is not to be accepted when contrary to church covenants, doctrine, or discipline, or to known facts, demonstrated truths, or good common sense. No person has the right to induce his fellow members of the church to engage in speculations, or take stock in ventures of any kind on the spurious claim of divine revelation, or vision, or dream, especially when it is in opposition to the voice of recognized authority, local or general. The Lord's church is a house of order. It is not governed by individual gifts or manifestations, but by the order and power of the holy priesthood as sustained by the voice and vote of the church in its appointed conferences. Genesis 37, 6-8. And he said unto them, Hear, I pray you, this dream which I have dreamed. For behold, we were binding sheaves in the field, and lo, my sheaf arose, and also stood upright, and behold, your sheaves stood round about, and made obeisance to my sheaf. And his brethren said unto him, Shalt thou indeed reign over us? Or shalt thou indeed have dominion over us? And they hated him yet the more for his dreams, and for his words. Joseph's dreams, which clearly signified future leadership, only added to the resentment among the brothers. 2 Nephi 5. Our younger brother thinks to rule over us, and we have had much trial because of him. Wherefore, now let us slay him, that we may not be afflicted more because of his words. For behold, we will not have him to be our ruler, for it belongs unto us, who are the elder brethren, to rule over this people. Genesis 37, 9-11. And he dreamed yet another dream, and told it to his brethren, and said, Behold, I have dreamed a dream more. And behold, the sun and the moon and the 11 stars made obeisance to me. And he told it to his father and to his brethren. And his father rebuked him, and said unto him, What is this dream that thou hast dreamed? Shall I and thy mother and thy brethren indeed come to bow down ourselves to thee, to the earth? And his brethren envied him, but his father observed the saying. Joseph's brothers sell him into Egypt. Genesis 37, 12-18. And his brethren went to feed their father's flock in Shechem. And Israel said unto Joseph, Do not thy brethren feed the flock in Shechem? Come, and I will send thee unto them. And he said unto him, Here am I. And he said to him, Go, I pray thee, see whether it be well with thy brethren, and well with the flocks, and bring me word again. So he sent him out of the vale of Hebron, and he came to Shechem. And a certain man found him, and behold, he was wandering in the field. And the man asked him, saying, What seekest thou? And he said, I seek my brethren. Tell me, I pray thee, where they feed their flocks. And the man said, They are departed hence, for I heard them say, Let us go to Dothan. And Joseph went after his brethren and found them in Dothan. And when they saw him afar off, even before he came near unto them, they conspired against him to slay him. Similarities between Joseph and Jesus Christ. Conspiring men united against them. Elder Orson Hyde said, "Behold the inconsistency of his elder brethren. If his dreams were of God, it was a sufficient cause of great joy to them, that they would have a ruler of divine appointment, and hence worse than madness to oppose him. If his dreams were not of God, then they had no cause to fear his elevation to the ruling power. But his dreams were of God, and the means which they adopted to prevent their fulfillment proved, under the overruling hand of Providence, to be the very means to bring about the things foreshadowed by them. It is not infrequently the case that plans and measures devised by the greatest cunning, ingenuity, and wisdom of the wicked against God's chosen prove to be the most impressive and happy means to bless and exalt those against whom these plans are laid." Genesis 37:19-20. And they said one to another, Behold, this dreamer cometh. Come now, therefore, and let us slay him, and cast him into some pit. And we will say, Some evil beast hath devoured him, and we shall see what will become of his dreams. The effective impact of Joseph's biography is created by the device of what Aristotle called dramatic reversal, which he considered essential to good drama, and which is often found in Greek writing. Fate thwarts the will of man by turning the effect of his actions to its own purposes rather than to his. Joseph is sold by his brothers so that they may be rid of the dreamer. Yet the dreams come true. The slave becomes master, hatred turns to love, and the rejected one saves his brothers' lives. In sum, man cannot alter the overriding purposes of divine power. Genesis 37:21. And Reuben heard it, and he delivered him out of their hands, and said, Let us not kill him. Brian Richards said, Reuben is the one who intends to protect Joseph. He stays the hand of bloodshed. He considers the grief of his father. He considers the fate of Joseph. Unaware that Judah has decided to sell him for money, he returns to the pit with the obvious intention of saving him. He deserves all the credit we can give him for saving Joseph, for in saving Joseph, he would eventually save himself and his family. Genesis 37:22-23. And Reuben said unto him, Shed no blood, but cast him into this pit that is in the wilderness, and lay no hand upon him, that he might rid him out of their hands, to deliver him to his father again. And it came to pass that Joseph was come unto his brethren, that they stripped Joseph out of his coat of many colors that was on him. Similarities between Joseph and Jesus Christ. They were stripped of their clothing. Brian Richards. The opposite of being clothed in the robes of righteousness is to be stripped of one's clothing. Like Christ was stripped of his robe before his crucifixion, Joseph is stripped of his special coat. The divestiture is symbolic of being stripped of one's authority, power, or position. Could the brothers forever prevent Joseph from exerting authority over them by taking away his coat? Like the Roman soldiers, Joseph's brothers assumed the authority to divest him of his inheritance as if they had the power. Whatever protection man would attempt to remove from Joseph, God would replace. As Isaiah said, I will greatly rejoice in the Lord, for my soul shall be joyful in my God. And he hath clothed me with the garments of salvation. He hath covered me with the robe of righteousness. In the Book of Mormon, Captain Moroni provides additional information about Joseph's coat that is not recorded in the Bible. He explained that Joseph's brothers tore his coat to pieces, and that one of the pieces was preserved. Joseph's father, Jacob, later prophesied that the remaining piece of Joseph's coat symbolized a remnant of Joseph's seed who would be preserved by God. The Lord promised that Joseph's posterity should never perish as long as the earth should stand. Genesis 37:24. And they took him and cast him into a pit, and the pit was empty. There was no water in it. Psalms 40. He brought me up also out of a horrible pit, out of the miry clay, and set my feet upon a rock. Genesis 37:25-26. And they sat down to eat bread, and lifted up their eyes and looked, and behold, a company of Ishmaelites came from Gilead, with their camels bearing spicery and balm and myrrh, going to carry it down to Egypt. And Judah said unto his brethren, What profit is it if we slay our brother and conceal his blood? Similarities between Joseph and Jesus Christ. They were betrayed by men named Judah. Judas is the Greek form of the Hebrew name Judah. Genesis 37:27-28. Come, and let us sell him to the Ishmaelites, and let not our hand be upon him, for he is our brother and our flesh. And his brethren were content. Then there passed by Midianites merchantmen, and they drew and lifted up Joseph out of the pit, and sold Joseph to the Ishmaelites for 20 pieces of silver, and they brought Joseph into Egypt. Similarities between Joseph and Jesus Christ. They were sold for the price of a slave in their day. Joseph for 20 pieces of silver and Christ for 30. Brian Richards said Christ was betrayed for 30 pieces of silver, the price of a slave. Joseph was also sold for the price of a slave, but there was a price differential. For slaves less than 20 years old, the price was only 20 pieces. The price received for Joseph, 20 pieces of silver, is the same price specified later in the Mosaic Law for a slave between the ages of 5 and 20. Typically, the price of a slave was 30 pieces of silver. Genesis 37:29. And Reuben returned unto the pit, and behold, Joseph was not in the pit, and he rent his clothes. Similarities between Joseph and Jesus Christ. Joseph's oldest brother looked for him in an empty pit. Christ, senior apostle, looked for him in an empty tomb. Genesis 37:30. And he returned unto his brethren and said, The child is not, and I, whither shall I go? And they took Joseph's coat and killed a kid of the goats, and dipped the coat in the blood. Brian Richards said the blood of this kid goat prefigures the blood of the lamb. The blood represents sin. In the case of the brothers, the blood represents their sin in selling Joseph. In the case of Christ, the blood represents the sins of the world. In both cases, the protagonist is sinless. In both cases, the protagonist would save those who had shed the blood of the innocent. Genesis 37:32-33. And they sent the coat of many colors, and they brought it to their father, and said, This have we found. Know now whether it be thy son's coat or no. And he knew it, and said, It is my son's coat. An evil beast hath devoured him. Joseph is without doubt rent in pieces. Brian Richards said, Why would Joseph conclude that Joseph had been ripped to pieces? The Genesis account merely states the brethren dipped the coat in blood. But the Book of Mormon tells us that the coat was all ripped up as well, so as to indicate a violent death. Moroni spoke of Joseph, whose coat was rent by his brethren into many pieces. Jacob merely assumed that Joseph was still in the coat when it was rent in pieces. Mormon recorded in the Book of Mormon that when Jacob saw that a remnant of the coat of many colors had been preserved, he prophesied that so also would a remnant of Jacob's seed be preserved. Genesis 37:34. And Jacob rent his clothes, and put sackcloth upon his loins, and mourned for his son many days. People in the Old Testament would often perform traditional acts or signs to express grief. Jacob rent his coat and put on sackcloth when he believed Joseph had died. Sackcloth was a coarse material made of goat or camel hair that was worn during times of mourning or repentance. Wearing sackcloth was often accompanied by the tearing of one's clothes. Genesis 37:35-36. And all his sons and all his daughters rose up to comfort him, but he refused to be comforted. And he said, For I will go down into the grave unto my son mourning. Thus his father wept for him. And the Midianites sold him into Egypt, unto Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh's and captain of the guard. Elder L. Tom Perry said, And they took their 17-year-old brother and took him as a slave to a caravan going into Egypt, a strange land, where they spoke a strange tongue and had strange customs. But the Lord was with this remarkable young man, and he seemed never to be discouraged. Though a stranger, a slave, his countenance must have radiated a special spirit. When offered for sale, he was purchased by a captain of the king's guard. It was only a short time before Joseph had so distinguished himself to the captain that he made him ruler over his house. In authority, he was the first servant, and he was made overseer over all the captain had. And the captain put his complete trust, his properties, his income, into the hands of Joseph. The Hebrew phrase, which is translated as captain of the guards, literally means chief of the butchers or slaughterers. From this meaning, some scholars have thought that he was the chief cook or steward in the house of the Pharaoh, but other scholars believe that butcher or slaughterer is used in the sense of executioner, and thus Potiphar was the commanding officer of the royal bodyguard who executed the capital sentences ordered by the king. Either way, Potiphar was an important man, but the latter position especially would give him great power and status in Egypt.